Hello. Good morning, room 17, and welcome to the Old Switcheroo MDM Migrations. Also a warm good morning, good afternoon, good evening to any virtual attendees that are watching around the world as well. We're all here together, even though we're not all in the same room. With that in mind, any of you that have been in other sessions before, just a reminder on the Q&A, we're going to be doing that through the JNUC app. You can open up the Q&A section, select this session, upvote questions, so then at the end we can kind of go through and get some of the best, most curious questions answered. And certainly with the topic at hand, this can be definitely a technical one and some interesting edge cases, many different scenarios that anyone might have in their environment when you deal with migration. So with all that said, please give a warm welcome to Andrew Needham, my colleague from the UK.
Thanks, Mark. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening, or whatever time, whether it's today or in the future, the next 60 days with these sessions being available. So I'm here today to talk to you about macOS MDM migrations. So this is something that's particularly close to my heart. It's been one of those areas I've specialised in, and I appreciate all of you who've joined. I know it might have come up as cancelled for it this morning. I had a bit of a head cold, so I had to get a negative COVID test before I could come in this morning. So it's been touch and go, but I'm here, so we're all good. It's just a cold, but still, please keep your distance. I'm Andrew. I'm a senior professional services engineer at Jamf, where I've been for almost 4.5 years now. You might hear from my accent that I'm British, based in the UK, just north of London. As I mentioned, macOS MDM migrations are kind of my specialty. They're what I've been working on as my main additional project to most of my normal professional services work for probably about 2.5 years of the time that I've been at Jamf. I have a lovely little dog called Sky, who I like to hang out with when I'm not doing work. I play bass guitar, and I listen to heavy metal. Have we got any metalheads in the house? Yes, brilliant. Have we got any metalheads online? I can't hear you, but anyway, usually like to get a few. They make themselves known, either through the T-shirts they're wearing or throwing the horns. Great, so what are we going to talk about today? So I'm going to start off by defining what do we mean by a device migration. I'm quite intentional about the language we're using there. Why do we need a specific workflow to do this? Why is this a thing? We're going to give you a bit of a peek behind the curtains to the history and development of our solutions, what we use at Jamf to help ease some of those pains of migrating macOS devices between servers without wiping them. And also talk a bit about how you might want to plan and deliver your own migration in your environments, whether that's in education or enterprise or whatever vertical you're in. And just again, to come back to that point of intentional language here, I'm talking about device migrations here. So the content for today will be specifically about how do we move the devices between MDM servers. All of this is done with the expectation that the Jamf Pro server that we're moving into is already configured. We're not covering moving things like the content. There are other workflows for that. So how do we actually move the devices themselves between those servers and minimize the impact on end users? So let's start off by talking about what a device migration is. So on our diagram here, we've got our source MDM, we have our computer in the middle, and our destination. We install a configuration profile on that machine, as well as potentially any additional frameworks, but the configuration profile is ultimately really how we're establishing trust with the device in a basic sense. Of course, it's Highlander rules. There can be only one. Pause for laughter. So we need to go and pull that MDM profile off the device there before we can get another one on to create new trust with a new destination server. So we have that's the challenge that we need to approach. Get the old one off before we can install the new one. We can't have them both on there at the same time. So in order to address this, we in-house have developed a workflow we call Jamf Migrate. Those of you active online may have seen this referred to as Voyage in the past. Jamf Migrate is what we're calling it these days. It does have support for macOS and for iOS, although the iOS client is It's a slightly different workflow. One of my colleagues, Misha, will have a presentation this afternoon at 3:45 where I understand he will be talking a bit about that. If you want to get a bit more information about the iOS workflow, please come down and see us on the services booth in the expo hall. But we are focusing on the macOS workflow here today. We would consider this to be a workflow rather than the product. It does require the engagement of Jamf professional services to deliver this. So we would be involved. And it will be migrating servers, devices even, specifically to Jamf Pro. That's another caveat here. So at this point, it is just to Jamf Pro from another supported MDM. In terms of other requirements, the devices that we're going to be migrating need to be running Big Sur or newer, so macOS 11 Big Sur or newer. And the source MDM needs to be capable of delivering custom configuration profiles and custom packages as well. So that's the way that we're going to deploy that. So I'd like to talk a little bit about why do we need migrations for devices. So there are a number of different situations that might warrant this. So if you can take a few moments just before I reveal my list, just have a bit of a think about what are some of the reasons that you may have had for doing a migration in your environment, if it's something you're already familiar with, or what are some of the reasons you could think that might cause you to have to migrate to a new MDM server? Don't worry, I'm not going to ask anyone to shout out for it. Yeah? No? Definitely? That's a good one. So yeah, here we go. Here's some of the reasons there. Potentially new Jamf Pro customers, so people coming to us from another MDM vendor. Could be a reason why you need to migrate your Macs. Acquisitions, company mergers. We had that in the front there. So we've acquired another business. We need to bring those machines in, whether they're coming from a competitor MDM to Jamf, or from another Jamf Pro server, or from Jamf School or Jamf Now. Could be a need to change the MDM server name. So any instance where we need to change the name of that server is going to cause us to have to do some form of re-enrollment. We would consider that to be a reason for having to migrate. Stand up a new server, new name, maybe content-wise identical, but we still need to have a method of moving those devices over, and various other things like organizational changes or on-prem to Jamf Cloud where we can't do a CNAME DNS redirect, which is what we typically do for moving on-prem to cloud. In some instances, perhaps the existing Jamf Pro server has a .local name. So maybe it's an older server, maybe it was established without an FQDN. At that point, that might be a reason why we might need this kind of migration. Okay. So some of the old timers in the room here might remember quick add packages when they were still a thing. So we're going to do man profiles here on our Big Sur machine. And here's the reason why we need to have this workflow, particularly now. So, read from the screen. Starting with macOS 11.0, this tool cannot be used to install configuration profiles. So when Big Sur was released, Apple made some modifications to one of the workflows we used to use for migrations. Because what we used to be able to do was install a quick add package, and within there we would go and install an MDM profile using the profiles binary that was on the machine. So this is Catalina and prior. And then the user, back until, what was it, some version of 10.12 or something, probably a bit before my time. But in any case, there was a state of user-approved MDM. So self-service did a pretty good job of saying to that user, hey, your machine is enrolled, but the MDM isn't user-approved. So the user has to go into system settings and approve that. But still, you could get by with that. It's a fairly simple process. You can go and push this quick add package down, pull the old MDM profile with the command line, and then go ahead and install that new profile. But it's no longer an option. So since Big Sur, we need user interaction. There is absolutely no way around this. The end user has to be part of this workflow. In terms of the intentions behind this, clearly it's to make macOS a more secure system. Configuration profiles, if they're really, really easy for a user to install or do so by accident, or you can do it without them knowing, then that's clearly a bit of a risk, given what a configuration profile can cause the machine to do. So, if we're to do this in an unassisted way with no extra agents, from the source MDM, we send a command to the device to go and pull the old MDM profile. And is it going to get to the next To the destination Jamf Pro server, we don't know. So in this phase here, we're leaving the device in an unmanaged state. It's potentially vulnerable. We've taken the MDM profile and all the configuration profiles of it. Those are probably required for our security tools. We don't have visibility of the device in this state here. So it's potentially a bit of a risky workflow. Over breakfast, I was having a chat with, I think, Melissa, who's possibly somewhere in the room here. Oh, wonderful. I see you waving there. Talking about how going through some of these workflows, you end up with machines that they go missing. And then you have to go and figure out who's got them and go and knock on doors and disrupt people. So not really something we want to do if we can avoid it. So if we can take just a few moments again, visualize some of the potential threats that might arise from doing an unassisted migration workflow. It's pretty scary, isn't it? Some of those thoughts there. Well, here they are all in big yellow letters, just to remind you there. So, just a selection of things that could be problematic with going through an unassisted migration workflow. If we want to go ahead and ask the user to do it for us, I mean, a lot of these, from my perspective, relate to the end user experience. That's the thing I'm passionate about. So we're going to give them a complex workflow. Users don't need to install configuration profiles on the regular. I mean, in an ideal environment, they never need to install configuration profiles. That should be something we're doing for them through automated device enrollment and through our MDM. So it's not something they're used to. Apple, of course, with newer releases of macOS, have purposefully made it the case that it's quite difficult to install a configuration profile. You really have to want to do it and read all the notifications on the screen. So it can be quite tricky. You could potentially have data loss in this workflow. The users might turn against you. You might get a bit of user distrust there. And again, a lot of what we're trading on here is a positive relationship with our end users. So these are all things that we've tried to address with our solution, Jamf Migrate for macOS. So when we were going through building this, there were a number of different areas that we thought, these are really important things that we want to try and address. We need to make it easy to deploy and scalable. Whether you've got 10,000 Macs or 10 Macs in your environment, we need a way to be able to go ahead and address that need. So it can deal with a small migration or a large migration without a big extra lift in terms of the technology or the tech debt that we've got for that there. It's got to be easy to set up and deploy with common Apple management workflows. I mentioned before, we just need a custom configuration profile and a package. So really easy. And those are things that are supported by the majority of MDMs. It's very important to us that we're able to customize this workflow. So both the behavior of it and the branding as well. Because the right experience for one organization isn't necessarily going to be the right experience for all organizations, or indeed, within an organization, the right experience for one group of users isn't necessarily going to be the right experience for all of the users who are going through this workflow. So with customization, it allows you to deploy the right workflow. It allows you to deploy it in a way that your users trust. You can use the right tone in your communications and your messaging. You can make sure it's branded so that's trusted by your users. And we also wanted to make sure that there is support for multiple languages in this as well. So depending on the end user's language on their device, we support English, French, German, Spanish, and Italian. So we'll go and select that and then give them the correct language. And this is one that I'm particularly passionate about here. Really, for me, the most important metric for this is try and preserve and extend the Apple experience in macOS. Because ultimately, if it wasn't important for us to care about the experience for the end users, we'd just send a wipe command to the machine and just be done with it. So this is very much for me, the core purpose of designing and building this solution was, how do we make this the best we can possibly for the end users? We really want to preserve and enhance that Apple experience. We want to minimize the amount of disruption through this. We want to give those users different ways to choose to interact. One thing that can be a very good thing to do in your environment is ensure that you're giving those users options They can either run this through self-service, or if they've chosen not to run through self-service, they will be asked to run it automatically. It will pop up, give them deferral options, things like that. We can add in deadlines to the workflow, and we wanted to make sure that it was easy to follow and had an attractive user interface. And perhaps just as importantly, it had to be secure as well, this solution. So we built it from the ground up to be a secure solution. One of the things that we have to handle for in this workflow is unremovable MDM profiles. So to do that, we've got a remote server we can communicate with. We ensure that the secrets for the API of the source MDM are never on the device itself. We host them with our remote service securely. We always make sure that devices are managed in some way throughout. There will always, at the minimum, be the Jamf binary on the machine, even when there's no configuration profiles. And we also wanted to ensure that we had good visibility and auditing capability of the devices throughout this process. So we build smart groups extension attributes to be able to report on the status of the machines as we go through. So, enough with me waffling on about this. Let's see what that's like for the end users. So, I want you all to get yourselves in character now, okay? Here's your direction. You're a member of staff at the Acme Corporation. You've been told by your absolutely incredible and amazing and awesome IT team, which, of course, you all are, that you're going to be getting a notification soon to go through a migration. Okay, are we all in character? Yes, wonderful. So here we go. Right, we're sat at our computer. It's Wednesday afternoon, and up pops our notification here. So preparing migration, our first step here is we're going to be installing the Jamf binary onto the machine, doing a binary-only enrollment. We then give the user some deferral options here. In our case, we say, well, let's just get it done now. We're not too busy. We're going to choose to start now. We then communicate up to our secure server with some API credentials to send a remove command to pull that old MDM profile off. And that goes, all the other config profiles go. It then detects that that's gone, and we're going to go and prompt the user to install our new MDM profile. In this case, we're in Sonoma, so slightly different experience to the previous ones, but it's pretty similar. It's a full screen experience instead of a notification, but then we direct the user, tell them what they need to do to install the new MDM profile. If they're a standard user, we can elevate them to be admins for a temporary short period of time and then demote them back down. So we go ahead and install the new MDM profile. There we go, we're done with that. So the user quits out that screen. It realizes that it's done, and it's going to pop back up in just one moment. And of course, very importantly, we need to renew the file vault recovery key. So as part of this workflow, we're going to prompt the user to enter their existing local password. So if they forget their password, then we can help them recover. And then after that's escrowed to the Jamf Pro server, we're going to go ahead and do our various final steps. Make sure everything's right in place and submit an inventory. You may notice as well, those of you might recognize the user dialogues for this workflow. We are using Swift Dialog, so a really fantastic utility developed by Bart Reardon. It's an open source user notification workflow, so we have all of the logic in the background written in a script that's running through this. And all of that achieved by deploying a configuration profile and a package. Okay. So we've seen the end user experience there. Let's have a look at what's going on behind the curtain in the admin side in the diagram. Okay, so we've got our source MDM, we've got our Mac in the middle there that's currently enrolled in the source MDM. We've got our Jamf Migrate server up at the top where our API credentials are for the old server, and then we've got our destination Jamf Pro. So we get our configuration profile on our package and we send them down to the device. That's when that window pops up. We then install the Jamf Migrate workflow on there. So launch daemons that keep it alive. That's then going to go out and talk to Jamf Pro and do a binary enrollment. So at this point, we've got a foot in both servers. We've got an MDM profile. We're enrolled still in the source, but the Jamf binary is on for the destination. So we have some management capability on the device. The device itself then thinks, right, I want to go and get rid of my MDM profile. I need a hand with this because it's an unremovable profile. So it goes up to the Migrate server that sends an API command down to the source MDM that then sends the unenroll command to the device and pulls the old MDM profile. And at this point, we've lost the MDM profile, but we do still have our Jamf binary enrollment to the destination. That device reaches out, grabs its MDM profile, and the user is prompted to install that. And if the user doesn't act quickly on that, we have visibility within Jamf Pro. We can go and follow up and then give them a helping hand if they're struggling with any of this. Okay. So we've got our technical solution here, but this would all be for naught if you haven't gone ahead and correctly planned for and designed what your migration is going to look like. So I like to break it down into 5 phases here. We've got our preparation phase, we've got our countdown phase, we have the delivery itself, and we have cleanup and post-migration. You notice only 20% of that is the actual delivery of the migration itself. The vast majority of what we're doing here is before and after. This really is, the delivery is all about the preparation. As I say, if you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. So I've drawn out here just an example timeline. This is very much dependent on your organization, your situation. This one runs for 7 weeks, but yours could be down to 3 weeks. It could be up out to 8 or even longer potentially. Note that a lot of these phases are overlapping and running in parallel. So I would consider that you want to begin your preparation, which we'll go through what we would specify and talk about in each of these sections in a moment. But your preparation is going to continue all the way through to when you start your delivery. Your countdown, where you're going to be informing your end users in a particular fashion that this is going to be happening soon, will be continue all the way up to the start of the delivery. We go through the delivery phase, and then towards the end, post-migration and cleanup are going to overlap a little bit as well. I often get asked in scoping calls when we're going to look to deliver this solution for customers. Often they will leave with a number of devices that they have and say, oh, we have 2,000 devices in our environment. We have 50 devices in our environment. We have 10,000 devices in our environment. How long is it going to take? And realistically, the number of devices is not going to have that much of an impact. Certainly not when compared to organizational factors. So things like the efficacy, it's easy for me to say, of your communications, your relationship with the users, buy-in from leadership, and engagement from any other stakeholders in the organization ultimately will have a far greater impact on how long it's going to take to deliver your migration than it will do the number of devices that you have. So, our preparation phase. The very first thing is communicate. So we need to inform the users very early on that this is going to be a thing. They should know, we should get their buy-in early, should also get leadership buy-in, because we can have that two-pronged approach where you're telling and being that trusted technical voice to the users, but the users are also having through from the leadership, they're being informed this will be happening and the expectations that are on them that they're going to be going through here. We could also build a narrative as well, so find ways to say, why are we doing this? Why is it that the users will be helping us and helping the organization at large by bringing us through this migration? So we could talk about some of the challenges they've had and illustrate how to the user that those challenges may be addressed and things may be better for them being in the new solution. You should also spend time at this point really starting to come to terms with what are going to be the common objections and questions to this, and try and think of some answers to those ahead of time. You're going to want to be making sure that you've got access to all of your services, so APNS. You want to make sure you've got access to your Apple Business Manager or School Manager for your VPP and your automated device enrollment. Also, other services, things like make sure you're on good terms with your network admins or certificate admins or anything that you're going to have to build out in terms of infrastructure within the new Jamf Pro server. I mentioned before that we're just talking about device migrations today. So with that in mind, the Jamf Pro server has to be ready. And if you're going to move into a new house, you're not going to move in there before you've got a roof on, before you've got the plumbing in. Make sure that you have either equivalent or better management from a device that is enrolled into your Jamf Pro server that you're going to. Also, you want to have a good sense of what assets you have out there. And if you've got, again, sorry for laboring the metaphors here, but you have your flock of sheep. If you don't know how many sheep you have, then how do you know you've been successful at the end? So you should really be taking this time to prepare by creating an asset list. Understand who has which Macs, at which point you can then go and follow up with those users. So I did work with a customer recently who they were looking at their numbers of machines that moved over, and they're like, well, these 30 machines, they've not done anything. And it turned out they were stuck in a cupboard somewhere. So having visibility of things like that, if you think, right, well, we have hands on these devices, we're just going to go ahead and wipe them because new users will get them in the future, you're not worrying about spending your precious time and resources on following up with those phantom users who don't really exist in the environment. So, the very first thing with the countdown is, say it with me, communicate. It's basic stuff here. So, give users some more solid details. We've told them that this is going to be a thing. They're going to go through a migration. We're actually starting to resolve some of those details. We've gone through some early testing. We've made sure Jamf Pro is ready to move to. We're going to be giving them some concrete details, some expectations, and a timeline. So again, very important to set expectations, because if they understand what is expected from them, then they can actually respond positively to that. We're going to use multiple forms of communication as well. So whether you use email, Slack, Teams, Tannoy announcements, posters in the break room, going up to people face-to-face, meetings, stand-ups, whatever you know is effective in your environment, because it's not going to be the same for everyone, start going and disseminating the message that way. You want to be continuing your testing at this point, validate any of those edge cases, and also support your support teams. So make sure that you provide enablement to those help desk users. So when there are issues or questions, those help desk teams understand what a successful migration looks like and can help guide those users through when we inevitably will always get some questions going through these workflows. Guess what? The very first thing, it is communicate. So again, we need to tell people it's actually happening now. We want to give the users multiple routes to do the right thing here. So empower them with those options. I mentioned earlier that we could have a self-service deployment if we wanted to. A very common workflow is to begin with it being optional. We could say to those users, okay, you've got 2 weeks, it's in self-service. Find a time that's convenient for you and go ahead and run the policy or how it's presented in the source MDM to trigger this workflow off. At which point we're saying to them, look, we understand, we value your time, you can run this when you want to. Of course, there will always be users who probably ignore the communications. We all know, we all have them. At which point we can then switch to having an automatic deployment, at which point, where we saw our user demo before, it just pops up on screen for them, and we give them some deferral options to say, well, look, you've had your initial phase, now you didn't opt in to do this, could you please select within the deferral periods that we've got and take yourself through there. So we're going to start with an optional workflow and then go ahead and enforce. It's also a good idea potentially to incentivize early adoption, find ways to educate those users so that, look, if you do it early, when you choose in self-service, you're going to have a better time, and try and find ways to encourage them to do that. Also, if necessary, depending on the size of your team, you might want to split this migration into bite-sized chunks. Say, for example, you have 2,000 users in your environment, and you've got one IT admin. Maybe if something completely unexpected happens and things went wrong, you probably can't deal with 2,000 tickets all in one go. So perhaps you want to start off with your C-suite first and go through and give them a white glove experience, and then go to the next technical team, and then the next, and go through by department. So that might also be an idea if you find that's a good way of managing your time and resources and getting it down into bite-sized chunks. So after we've delivered the majority here, we're in the cleanup phase. So I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but again, communication. So the users who haven't yet completed the migration, we're going to be going and following up with them. We talk about the 80-20 rule. In this case, I'm using that to refer to 80% of your users will probably require 20% of your effort, in the sense that they'll just go ahead and do it. You'll say, could you do this? They say, yep, sure, no bother. We'll go ahead and do the migration, no issues there. There's always going to be that 20% or so that maybe need a little bit of additional guidance or help or time and attention to get them through. We can use the smart groups that we've got built in Jamf Pro to give us visibility of where they are in the process. Maybe they've just not understood the instructions that are being given. We'll be able to see the users who've spent any particular time in one of the phases of the migration, and then say to those users, hey, I can see you're having a bit of a difficult time getting through the migration there. is there anything we can do to help you? And they might say, oh yeah, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to click. It might be that Do Not Disturb is turned on and they haven't read the message to say that the notification will be coming up in Notification Center and they just didn't see it. So we want to go around and use those smart groups to see and focus our time and attention on the users who haven't done it yet. And really importantly, always assume positive intent. So approach things that these are users who need help. It's not they're trying to avoid doing the right thing or that they're being malicious. Okay, post-migration here. So this is absolutely amazing work. We've done it. We've migrated all those users. So I think you all need to give yourselves a pat on the back, break out the champagne. We want to be monitoring validity of file vault recovery keys. Of course, very important. We want to make sure if a user forgets their password, we can give them a valid file vault recovery key. So using smart groups, that will allow you to validate in your Jamf Pro environment which machines have a valid key. We also want to worry these days very much about bootstrap tokens. I know it's yet another token that we have to be worried about, but bootstrap tokens are critical for having success with MDM commands and software updates for Apple Silicon devices. So very important that we monitor validity of bootstrap tokens. They should escrow automatically the next time a user logs in, but again, we do want to be keeping an eye on that. We also have a couple of items as well that at the end here, we've migrated all the devices, we've closed down the source MDM server. If we've used an inventory preload to pre-fill information about devices, then we want to go ahead and delete that out of Jamf Pro just to avoid any issues with changing devices later on. And the smart groups and the extension attributes that we used to do the monitoring, they're no longer needed, so they can be removed out of the server, and on we can go. And here's our migration timeline just up there again. So I came up with a snazzy, well, sort of mnemonic. It's not really a mnemonic, but good communication, preparation, collaboration makes for a successful migration. I quite like the sound of that. Lots of shun sounds. So. Main thing is, remember, it's ultimately kind of coming back to the basics. Talk to your users, treat them with respect, and assume positive intent, and it should go without a hitch. So, if you would like this workflow, I did mention before, this is something that we need to engage Jamf Professional Services in order to have, and this is because we need that Jamf Migrate server involved. It is delivered as a half-day migration. It is for the device migration only. If you wanted to work with us to have some additional time to help you build out your Jamf Pro server, you can also take onboarding or just professional services days. Also, very commonly, we will collaborate with service partners. So it might be that you've taken some services from one of our excellent service partners, and then the Jamf Professional Services engineer just comes in to deliver the half day for this particular workflow. We help you build the workflow, do some testing, and then you can take that forward, and we'll give you advice on planning and how you might want to model your own migration workflow. And in terms of what you get in that half-day migration service, that would cover building those settings, doing a deployment, demonstrating that it works in your environment, and then delivering it. And our Jamf Migrate servers tend to stay live for about 120 days. Of course, we will work with you. We're not going to leave you hanging if you need to take longer, but the expectation is really want to be getting this done in a matter of 3 to 4 months after the service delivery. And if you want to come and talk to me any more about this, or if you want to make any other inquiries, we do have the services booth down in the expo hall, or otherwise, please get in touch with your customer success manager, and they can put you in touch with the services team. So before I leave you, I wanted to talk about a case study here, a customer I worked with last year, in 2022, although it does feel longer than that. Monzo, they're a UK-based online bank with over 8 million customers. They wanted to move their 2,500 Macs from a competitor MDM to Jamf Pro. What I wanted to talk about here is really what they did very effectively. Again, it comes down to their communication. Although they did have a bit of a secret weapon. They had this little guy here, their mascot, Hot Chip. So those of you based in the UK, or if you're Monzo customers, you may have seen this little character, who's quite adorable, which I didn't think I would ever say about a representation of a credit card. But internally, they have plushies of Hot Chip. And these things are rare as hen's teeth. You can't get them for love nor money. But what they thought to themselves was, well, you know what will give us a fighting chance at doing this? We're going to take the Jamf Migrate workflow, and we're going to incentivize our users to do it early by getting a hot chip plushie. So they went and spoke to the chief people officer, and I don't know, they must have something on them to persuade them to get one of these. But they got a hot chip plushie, and they said to their employees in their communications, look, you go into self-service and run this. In the first 2 weeks, you get entered into a draw to win the hot chip plushie. And they got a really amazing response to that. People got very, very enthused. They really wanted to do this. And in a sense, the takeaway from that is not that you should be offering a holiday to the Bahamas or anything really high value as your incentive. It's just about coming up with an effective incentive in itself. And for them, it was a hot chip plushie, but for you, it might be a box of donuts or a mention in the monthly newsletter, or just a shout out in a stand-up or something like that. Ultimately, remember, you know your users better than anybody else does. You know what they will respond positively to. So be creative. Think of ways to incentivize those users. In fact, the term of doing a Jamf migration has actually entered the lexicon of terms at Monzo to refer to any internal IT project that goes viral. I was talking to Eric and Ashley, the admins there, the other day, just catching up with them, and one of them was saying that in the Slack channel, somebody had gone and they're doing a Jamf migration to refer to something taking off internally. So just to go and represent, this is a sanitized graph that they sent me from their endpoint monitoring. You can see there that it was in July last year that we did this, and we got roughly 80% of devices in around about 2 weeks' time there. So some pretty incredible movement in terms of those devices and get them across there. And it only took, I think, another week or two for them to do the tidy up and clean up afterwards. And a fairly significant percentage of the ones at the end there were users who were either on PTO, on parental leave, maternity, paternity, or on long-term sickness. So they very effectively worked with their HR teams to understand who they should go and follow up with. Of course, if there is an employee who is unwell, the last thing you want to be doing is going and hounding them saying, why haven't you done a migration? So they worked effectively with their HR team to understand who it was appropriate to go and follow up with. So definitely in terms of how you can deliver your migration, this is something that everybody can do. You've just got to be clever about the way that you communicate and deliver that. So, and with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening and invite any questions.
Great session, Andrew. A lot of great questions coming in through the Q&A. We don't have a ton of time, but we've got some decent time to go through. Not a lot of votes on them, so if you want to help uprank, you can do some of the voting. But I'm going to start by picking a couple. One of them specifically might just be a clarification, and I might be summarizing here. But when you showed the diagram that showed the migration process and the client computer getting the MDM profile from the destination server.
Yes.
Is that done via like user interactive installation of a profile, or can that also be through automated device enrollment and
absolutely.
System settings?
There was it was a bit of a simplification because I realized drawing that diagram that I'd start involving all of the systems with automated device enrollment and checking in with MDM servers and things like that, and with activation servers, it would probably get a bit cluttered on that screen. So we support both user-initiated enrollment or automated device enrollment flows. It just depends on what's appropriate for the device. So within the workflow, we will figure out, should we be going down the automated device enrollment route? If that's the case, then we run profiles renew-type enrollment on the machine, which will cause that machine to check in with Apple's activation servers. If there is a valid record there in Apple Business Manager or School Manager, it then points that device back down to a pre-stage enrollment in Jamf Pro. Alternatively, if it can't do that, it creates an MDM profile on device and then starts the installation, opens system settings for the user and says, click here. Just install it that way. So either way, the end user experience is pretty much the same. The one we saw in the demo video was the automated device enrollment, but yeah. As far as the end users are concerned, there's kind of no realistic difference to that. We're still just asking them to be in system settings and click a button pretty much.
Awesome. Any ideas on how to keep enterprise Wi-Fi on and enabled during the process of migration? That seems like a big challenge.
Yeah.
Many variables.
Use an enrollment network. So within our workflow, we have the ability to specify an array of networks to say, if you are on this network, then you need to shift to another network. So you can put down in the configuration for Jamf Migrate an SSID and a password for an open enrollment network. These are going to be going in plain text in a configuration profile, so it needs to not have anything sensitive in terms of access, but just an enrollment network of some kind that can just get out to the internet, to your Jamf server, typically into the Jamf Migrate server, and it will go and switch the device to that network to perform the workflow. When we get into Jamf Pro, you're going to expect to get the configuration profile and the certificates or anything back down onto the device from Jamf Pro. So that then replaces the 8021X and off you go. Alternatively, if you don't have an enrollment network, what Migrate will do is it will just pop up a screen to the end user saying, hey, you can't proceed on this network, please pick a different one. And then you might have to just filter into your comms for that, perhaps ask the users to do it from home if they can. But yeah, this is certainly something we spent a lot of time thinking about because, yeah, 8021X can be hard.
Yeah. Well, and there's other questions, whether it's network or otherwise. It's that in-between time of one MDM and the other that I think there's some other questions here that kind of deal similarly. Say you mentioned there's a number of threats that are potentially there when it's unmanaged. If anyone's filing any common vulnerability security scores or CVSS scores with their security team, what suggestions do you have for filling out paperwork for the threat of the Kurgan?
I'm glad somebody spotted that. I mean, make sure that you have a sword with you at all times in case you have to do battle with the Kurgan. But I have faith that you will defeat them, and then the quickening will happen, and you will come out on top.
Awesome. Also, any good ways or tips to keep the migration UX clean when there may be like numerous prompts from security apps, system extensions, network filters, web content, etc.?
There's not an awful lot that we can do in that sense, in that those system extension prompts, any other utilities, anything other that might pop up. There's not a great deal we can do to clear that off. We try our best to keep the migrate screens front and center. The advice typically comes down to make sure that you've done plenty of testing so you know what the experience is going to be like in your environment. And if that is going to be something that happens, make sure to communicate to your end users. Just say, hey, you are going to see the following prompts, just dismiss them. And ultimately, if there's endpoint security that needs system extensions or any PPPC, anything like that, that's all going to come back down from Jamf Pro. So when they're through the workflow, ultimately, they will be back into the correct managed state, and those notifications should disappear afterwards. But it's a case of understanding what will come up in your environment and making sure we communicate to the end users to tell them that, say, look, you may get a few extra notifications. Please just dismiss those and follow the main video. I mean, we would usually recommend that for a given environment, you do a PDF screenshot guide. We can supply you with some information that you can put in there to describe the workflow, grab your own screenshots, or do videos as well and host them internally and ask your end users to go and watch that video, because then it will have the prompts. I mean, you may have noticed the video I had there was, I suppose, best case scenario in the sense that that was done on a machine that didn't have any extra endpoint security tools on, just to keep that looking clean. But we're definitely aware of that, and we know that that can be a challenge.
Awesome. I've got potentially a couple more questions here. We only have a couple more minutes of Q&A.
I'll be quick.
But and this may be different per each org, but how does the cleanup look for people on, say, long-term leave who fail to migrate before the old MDM has to be turned off? What's some considerations to think of?
Sure. In the example with Monzo, what they made the choice to do was go ahead and send unenrollment commands out to those devices. As far as I know, I think most of those were ultimately received, but there is a potential chance, and it does depend on how the source MDM handles this kind of thing. If they're just going to turn the thing off, and at that point there is no opportunity to send an MDM command to remove that. It depends on that end user. If you absolutely cannot countenance wiping the device, then unfortunately it will be a case of you're going to have to touch that device, you're going to have to disable system integrity protection, go in, delete the profile, stuff that we normally tell you guys not to do. So really the realistic situation is, unfortunately, you're probably going to have to wipe that device. But hopefully within your planning, you would identify where these things might come up and ensure that where there are users, you've got that data backed up.
Awesome. And I'm going to do one more here because this is a question I've never thought of as well. But for folks using like Microsoft compliance integrations with Jamf Pro and Entra ID, how should Macs that are enrolled be handled as part of the migration? So for context, devices enrolled with device compliance have separate device entries stored in Entra.
They do, yes. So that does complicate matters again further. For most customers I've worked with moving from Entra, from Intune, it has tended to be the case that we've had to establish an additional workflow. You could use I keep on wanting to call it Azure, an Entra ID runbook that would work with running a PowerShell or one of their workflow automations that would go ahead and move it between the relevant groups or delete a device based on a webhook. So we have a group that we build for this workflow called Migration Monitor Complete. Machine hits that, can then go ahead and send its information up to that webhook. It comes back and does a reverse check with the device ID against Jamf Pro for extra information for the user assigned to it, and then it can go ahead and delete the record that it needs to and move the user over. Or alternatively, that just has to be something that you do manually. It depends on the size of your environment. But yeah, something we're aware of, and for a number of customers with the expertise, we've worked with them to help them build that automation within Azure, Entra ID.
Awesome.
Cool.
Throw another coin in the cookie jar for the Azure call out.
Jar. Can I just say I have got a brain date later on this morning at I forget when, 11 I think it is, where I will be talking about this. I also have one about follow-up from the secure Wi-Fi talk I did yesterday. So please sign up for it. Come and talk to me. I will be around. You can ask questions. I'm on LinkedIn. However you need to get me, just come and find me.
Awesome. One more time, a round of applause for Andrew.
Thank you.
Have a great day.